Hi, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials, as well as give a lot of baking business tips. Now today is kind of a mix between a tutorial video and just showing you what it takes to make these really grand big cakes. Now, whenever I make these really big cakes for birthday parties or for events that are for myself, generally the party is fairly small. There aren't that many guests. So there is going to be a mix of real and fake cake today. I'm crumb coating this 4-inch extra tall, and then I'm going to place it in the fridge overnight just so that it really solidifies. It's still been pretty hot and there's not a whole lot of air conditioning at the venue that we have planned for this, so I want to make sure that I give this the best chance possible. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on those fake tiers at the bottom, but the first thing that I need to do is I need to create the little water sails that are going to go at the front of the cake. And all I'm using today is rice paper. I love using this rice paper to actually create spring rolls that I love to eat, but they're also super great and versatile for creating this water-like effect on a cake. All you have to do is place them in water, and then you place them on a non-stick baking mat. You can also place them on parchment, and that goes in the oven at 175 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 15 to 20 minutes or until they're hardened to your liking. If you are going to place them onto your cake while they'll be sticking up, you may need to place them in the oven for a bit longer. All you're doing really is you're dehydrating all of that water out of there. Now what I'm doing is I'm airbrushing this. Now, yes, I understand this bottom of the cake looks very beat up. Well, if you do as much baking as I do, I really try to utilize things over and over, especially when it comes to display cakes. So this particular cake has had the fondant ripped off of it, put back on, and then had that done again and again. So that's why the fondant coverage on this is a little bit rough. And I actually covered this in fondant a long time ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it all up with this edible airbrushing, and then we're going to put the sails on top as well. Now, if you watch my videos a lot, then you guys know my airbrush is actually broken right now. So it's not actually outputting that color exactly as it should, but it works in this instance. It's kind of speckly when you look up close. Now what I'm doing is I'm applying some of those rice paper sheets just directly on there instead of letting it dry in the oven. The reason that I'm doing this is so that it sticks to the cake and it molds perfectly to the shape. And then I'm going to use those previously dried pieces elsewhere on the cake. Now, if you decide to utilize this technique, one thing I do want to caution you is that there is going to be a little bit of shrinkage that happens once this rice wrapper fully dries. But since this is a fairly abstract idea, it probably won't make that big of a deal if it shrinks just a little bit. Now, my friend Rachel, who I do a lot of collaborations with, because guys, this is my real life that I'm showing you basically. And it is a long-standing tradition of ours to always decorate my children's birthday cakes together. We also do a lot of other cake decorating together as well. So she's working on covering the 8-inch styrofoam dummy. And if you guys are wondering where I get my supplies, I'll try and list most of them down in the description box below so you can go ahead and see what I'm using. Now, this is not a sponsored video. However, all of the fondant and modeling chocolate that you're going to see us use in today's video was all gifted to me by Satin Ice. They are my favorite brand of all time when it comes to modeling chocolate and fondant. So huge shout out to Satin Ice and thank you very much. So as you can see, she's working on this cake by smoothing out all of those edges. Now, if this were a real cake, we probably wouldn't be flipping cakes upside down, but that is the beauty of using something like a dummy cake. Now, I know Rachel always gets a little bit frustrated when she comes and works in my kitchen because I don't own 2 fondant smoothers, which is what she would prefer to use. But luckily, she has developed a technique that she can use at my house. Of course, though, I really should just get an extra fondant smoother because I do think that this is a great way to get a nice, clean, sharp edge on the side. I want to make mention that as she's doing this, I'm working on a bunch of the airbrushing details as well on the cake. Whenever we work together, we're doing a million things at once. So here is the custom stand that my friend Martin built me. It is fantastic, it's super strong, and there's holes in there so that we can put dowels inside of our cake. I found myself building and rebuilding structures out of different iron pipe and all of that kind of stuff. So I wanted a stand that I could just use over and over again that would be good for cakes like this where I want to develop space in between. I've seen similar stands, but I haven't seen ones that had that space for the dowel, and my friend also built me custom rods to go in there as well. All of the materials are food grade, but we really don't have to worry about that for this particular cake because everything is going into a fake cake. And we did have to mess around with that. Whenever we're doing something new or something different, we always have a period where we have to kind of troubleshoot and think about how we're going to do things. Originally, I didn't have any dowels that were going to go through this. However, because I do have to move this cake to a different location, I thought about how am I actually going to transport this, especially with a real cake on top as well. So that's why we decided to add on that dowel portion. Now my friend Rachel is making a little tiny Nemo. She's just creating this out of a mix of modeling chocolate and fondant. Like I mentioned in other videos, guys, I love mixing modeling chocolate and fondant because I find you get a really, really smooth look. And in order to create all of these little details, it's super, super simple. You're just taking pieces and you're melting that black together so that it makes it look exactly like Nemo's stripes. And then we're making a space for the eyes as well. As far as fondant figures go, we really don't use too many fancy tools. You can get a lot of these tools on Amazon for pretty cheap. I've even seen some dollar stores sell these tools as well. And if you don't have access to these right away, you can use chopsticks or whatever other utensils that you have on hand. One word of advice, when you're working with black fondant and white fondant, you do want to make sure that you really, really clean your hands in between. I always say the best way to figure out if your hands are clean is to meld together white fondant in your hand because it picks up every single little bit of color that is not white. As you can see here, this is a typical conversation that we would have talking about how we're going to handle that structure with Hank later on, where he's actually supposed to look like he's holding up the cake. So the first thing that I need to do before we even get started on that is cover up this stand. Now, I did ask my friend Martin to make this for me in silver because I do want to highlight this stand for other uses, especially for wedding cakes. I've seen a lot of different things being done with this type of stand, so I'm very, very excited to showcase it. In this instance, however, I need this fully covered because it's going to act as my gravity-defying element. I really don't have to be too careful with this either because everything is going to be covered in details. I am trying to smooth this, but not because I'm trying to smooth out the fondant. I really need that fondant to adhere to the stand so nothing comes apart. A few months ago, I posted a video where I showed you guys my friend clearing out her bakery, and then she gave me a whole bunch of her stock that she didn't need anymore, and that is really because she likes to do everything by hand, just like she did in that seaweed shot. Now I'm creating Bubbles, and Bubbles is a little bit of a kooky kind of character, and whenever I make characters, I tend not to do them spot on. I always like to add my little flair to them. So Bubbles, when I look at Bubbles in the movie, I see just really kind of zany eyes and zany expressions. So I really want to make sure that I convey that. I am looking at a picture for reference, but it's always harder to make a 2D picture become something 3D. So it's definitely a little bit tricky, but all you have to do is look at the basic shapes that you're seeing. And what I see is these really crazy big eyelids and eyes. So I definitely want to emphasize that. So full disclosure, Hank gave me a headache. I actually made a whole other Hank prior to this, but it wasn't working structurally. So although I was happy with Hank's shape and everything, when I tried to place it on the side of the cake rather than propping it on top here, it just was not working. So Rachel and I discussed it. She decided that it would be best if we propped him up on top of the cake, and I completely agree. It also helped with the fact that that arm was starting to look too large in order to cover up part of that cake stand. So here is a shot of the old Hank that I created first. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because we did end up being able to use the same eyes from this Hank that I created and put it onto the new Hank. And it's very simple. Again, you're looking at those basic shapes and you're creating them. And this particular Pixar movie is actually a great one because it's not too difficult with the eyes. I sometimes find that some Disney characters have really intricate eyes, and if you mess up the proportions on them, it doesn't turn out right. But this one is pretty forgiving because it's basically just circles within circles. And Hank never seems to have his eyes fully opened unless he's super surprised or shocked. So this seems to be his natural expression with his eyelids half closed. And I am using just some edible airbrush as paint, but you can totally use whatever edible paints that you would like. I just use this because I always have it on hand, and I like to try not to buy too many extra products that can only do one job. So I like the fact that my airbrush colors can airbrush and they can also paint as well. well. Now, what really brightens up expressions, if you ever find that your characters aren't looking lively enough, you need to add little shots of white. That white is going to wake up your character completely. And I just go in with white food coloring. Now, the reason that I don't use airbrush for this is because I always find it's too translucent. So the white food coloring seems to have a very, very different texture than any of the other edible gel food colorings that I use. So I find it's thick enough. Now, here we are working on the cake together. Rachel is going in and she's making all of those indents that bring Hank to life, and I am finishing up that Bubbles character. You'll notice that I chose to finish up the character on the cake. This means that I don't have to worry about the structural integrity at all. Now, if we look at Nemo, Nemo is a lot smaller, so having his fins stick on there was very, very easy. Whereas Bubbles, because they're a little bit bigger, we needed to make sure that everything was placed directly on there to give the illusion that Bubbles can fully stand on their own. And I'm going ahead and doing the exact same thing that I did with the Hank character's eyes, and I'm just creating circles. Now, of course, if you're not comfortable with creating those freehand like I do, you can definitely take a piping tip and indent it a little bit and then fill it in with color. And now we're going to go in with airbrushing. It's so funny what some of us like and don't like, but my friend Rachel really is not a big fan of airbrushing, so I'm going to handle that portion today. I love airbrushing, but things that I don't like doing as much is things that are structural, like this Hank character. So we're a fabulous team together because we just like to do different types of things. Now what I'm doing here is I'm actually taking orange airbrush. Now, in the picture of Hank, it kind of looks like it has a reddish hue, but what I've learned from airbrushing is that all you really need is you just need the same exact color as whatever it is that you're airbrushing, and then it will darken. It's always very, very dark. You're very rarely going to get a pale airbrush. Now, I am having to hold my hose together, which you would not have to do if your airbrush is in working condition. And the reason that I had to do that is because I didn't want that overspray that was okay on the bottom tiers with all of that watercolor, because it just won't work on Hank. Then I'm giving him a good steam and I'm fixing up this eye portion. Now, I did use white food coloring for those dots. I want to make sure that that's super, super secure and going to stay super, super white, so I ended up swapping it for some pearls. But honestly, if everything is dry and then you add that white food coloring on top, you're going to have no issues at all. And then I'm going in and I'm going to airbrush Bubbles just a little bit as well to give a little bit more depth. And my friend is putting on all of those tentacles, which takes a little while, but it's so, so well worth it. And to create those, it's really easy. All you need to do is take a little bit of a peachy, orangey type fondant, make circles, and then press it into those tentacle areas. And we're really not being too picky about what the back of the cake looks like, because the back of the cake will not be seen. This is day 2, by the way, of working on this cake, so finally I'm ready to take that 4-inch out of the fridge, and Rachel is covering that for me while I steam the cake and I put on all the rest of the details, like all of those little seashells and all of the little things that are really going to make this cake pop. Now, my big concern, again, with this 4-inch is making sure that it stays intact in that hot weather. I know a lot of you guys talk about that as an issue all year round. I really only have to deal with it in summertime. I'm also going in with a little bit of edible pen, just making sure that everybody's eyes are nicely outlined, and I'm also adding in color here and there. Now, this cake has a lot of airbrushing going on all over the place, and if you're wondering, yes, my feet were blue for 2 days. No matter how many shields I put up for this airbrushing, I find it still gets everywhere. And blues and reds are definitely the colors that keep on giving. Now I'm placing these edible rice paper sails that we made earlier that are fully dried into the cake, and you'll notice they're freestanding because they're fully dehydrated. My friend then hand cut all of those lantern letters so they were in the font of Finding Nemo. Whenever you're hand cutting things, you really want to make sure that you use a super, super sharp knife, or else you're going to get a lot of jagged edges. And nearly 2 buckets of fondant later, approximately anywhere from 8 to 12 hours of working on this cake, 1 whole airbrush bottle, as well as 2 tubs of modeling chocolate later, here we are with this beautiful, beautiful Nemo cake. Now, every time I create over-the-top cakes like this, it always surprises me how we do run into situations that maybe we haven't come into contact with before. So although we've made gravity-defying cakes together before, that Hank arm, it was a little bit tricky to figure out how we were going to make it proportional, but also look like he was holding up the cake realistically. Now let's get into the pricing. So as you guys saw from the title, as a custom order only, this would be $1,800 Canadian. Now, aside from the fact that we do live in one of the most expensive cities in the world, we have a lot of product that we used on this cake, as well as a lot of time. And it also takes a lot of skill to make something like this. So that is why we have that high price tag. The stand alone took about $200 to make. Now that was a long video, but we finally made it to our subscriber of the day, and the featured subscriber is Devin, and Devin sent this really adorable picture of this unicorn cake to me. I absolutely love it. So be sure to drop Devin a comment, a like, and do follow Devin on Instagram so that you can see more beautiful and delicious creations. And if you want a shout out on my next video to our now 40,000 subscriber family, then please follow me on Instagram at SDBakeShop and be sure to tag me. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!